So in this video, I want to talk about something that I mentioned to all my students that take my private class, and it's super important, and that is to divide up your workflow into four parts. But I really want to talk about the last two. The first workflow that I teach is how to draw in proportion. The second is how to mix your colors. The third is how to cover your canvas with paint, and then the fourth is how to fix it once you've covered the canvas with paint. And what I want to talk about is the importance of separating those last two, so that as you start to cover your canvas with paint, you're not going in there and fixing and playing and blending and doing all that work. You're getting the canvas and getting your values put in first. Before I get into the depth of that lesson, let me explain. I've got a big scar. I had 13 stitches on my head. As you can see here, I've got a new fancy scar because I took a fall and hit my head. And I promised you guys a video on painting reflections, and I got about this far in that painting when a few weeks ago I fell and hit my head and had to get stitches, and it was, had black eyes, and it was just a big, ugly mess, and didn't really feel like getting on front of the cameras. But anyway, I'm totally fine. Please, really it's just a cosmetic thing that I had to, go through getting the stitches and all the rest, but I didn't spend the night in the hospital or anything like that. But anyway, just wanted to explain why I have not released the video on painting reflective surfaces like I promised. I'm working on it now. And then the other thing is I'm just finishing my studio finally. I had to put in an additional wall, and it's just been those things take longer than you think, but my studio is just about finished. I'm waiting just to put in the door, and it'll be completely done, and then I can really make demonstration videos in earnest. Anyway, sorry about that long ramble. Let's get back to the lesson. So when you're painting what painting what you see, and you're doing my workflow, if you're about 80% done and you've put in, and I teach painting from the darks to the lights, so you paint in your shadows first and then you go through, and then painting your highlight last. I talk about painting in some background around your object before you paint it. In other words, you don't just paint a vase on stained canvas or blank canvas. You paint some background around it first. And you're doing all of that, but here's the point, is that as you're laying in your colors, and as you're checking your values, and you're doing a lot of color checking, and you're really following this method of laying in your colors and checking every stroke, and you're not making judgments about, does this look like that? Does my painting look like the source? You're really just making judgments about, are my values correct? And you're doing that not by judging it with your eye, but by judging it by color checking. If you're working from a photograph, you're wiping paint on your laminated photo and checking it that way. This is the method that I teach for learning how to mix colors and see color, and how to paint. Or if you're using a color checker, you're holding it out and you're checking and you're seeing where those values go. But your focus is, let me put my values in wrong. You could almost decide that you want to paint as ugly or as horrible as you can, so long as your values are right. And if you focus on that instead of trying to make this look like that, this is in the first step. And once you get the canvas covered and you've got everything put in and there's no more blank canvas anywhere, then that's when you start judging and saying, does my painting look like my source? And making adjustments, whether it's fixing or blending or changing angles or whatever it is. And here's the deal, is that if I bring somebody, and I've mentioned this before, but it's absolutely true, if I bring somebody in who's never painted before and is not an artist into the studio, just some normal person that has never painted or has anything to do with art or anything, and I show them your painting and it's 80% finished, but you haven't put in the highlight, you haven't put in the light colors on the top, it's 80% finished, and I ask them, do you see that the shadow in his painting is darker than it is in the source? And they would very likely say, yes, I can see that it's darker. And they would be wrong. It actually was painted perfectly, but because of these optical illusions, they'll look at that and they'll think that it's painted wrong, even though it's right. Now, on the other hand, if the canvas is completely covered and you've basically put all your values in where they go, including the highlight and everything else, and then I bring in that same person who's never painted before, and I say to them, do you see that the shadow on their vase is ever so slightly lighter than the shadow in the source? And they can say, yes, I can see that it's ever so slightly lighter, and they would be right, because they have no problem making those judgments once all the canvas is covered and all the values have been put in. So it's very difficult to do, because what you tend to do is to want to fix as you paint. You put in some color, you paint in a value, and you immediately are trying to say, does this look like that? And you're already fixing as you go, and that is far inferior to painting it and just laying in your values, trying your very best not to make judgments. You can even attempt to paint ugly. It doesn't matter. As long as your values are put in right, as long as the darkness and the lightness of your color as you put it in is basically right, then once that's all filled in, then it's real easy to make those judgments. And then you can fix, and you're looking at it and you can see where the problems are. And so that's really important. And then the last part of this lesson about doing it in 2 steps is, and this is something that I've mentioned in other videos, but when you're starting to fix your painting, and let's say you've got all your values put in and you're trying to decide what is the difference between this and that, and you're just asking a series of questions, is the shadow too light or too dark? Is this angle wrong? And is it smoother? Is it more blended in the egg that I'm painting, or whatever it is? But it's always best, even if you're going to do a polished finish painting where you blend the egg and make it all perfect, it's still better to make those changes once your values are put in. And when you're deciding what is wrong with my egg or my vase or portrait or whatever it is, instead of looking into the detail and trying to decide what is wrong with it in terms of little detail on the surface, instead you're stepping back and you're asking yourself, where are my value problems? And by fixing those value problems one by one, that's where the magic happens. That's when things really start looking, in that high level of realism that I talk about. So I hope that lesson is helpful. Again, I'm going to have a series of demos that I've been talking about. The first one, reflective surfaces, should be out next week. I've just, sorry about the delay, and please don't worry about my face. I'm totally fine. And we'll see you guys in the next video. And by the way, I have my own art supply company right here in Austin, Texas, and we manufacture all of our own products. We have a whole line of paint and brush holders, palettes, color checkers, all sorts of things. So go check that out if you haven't at genevafineart.com.